Perfect. Let's dive deep into the human cost section of the script. This part should feel heavy, emotional, and almost cinematic, pulling the viewer into the misery and destruction Gin Alley caused in 1700s London. Here's a long, viral-style narration script, around 1,000 plus words just for this section, that could be expanded further if you'd like. The human cost. Picture this, it's the year 1730. You're walking through the narrow, soot-stained alleys of London. The air smells thick of rot, unwashed bodies, coal smoky, a broken bar, and gin. Always gin. Everywhere you look, you see hollowed faces, red eyes, and shaking hands clutching cheap clay cups of the stuff they call Madame Geneva. And for many, Madame Geneva was not a lady of comfort but a ruthless mistress of death. This was not a casual drink after work. This was not wine at dinner. Gin in the 1700s was closer to poison, a cheap, powerful, and devastating. And for the poor of London, it became both escape and executioner. Mothers and children lost to gin. One of the darkest and most disturbing aspects of the gin craze was the impact on families. The famous engraving by William Hogarth, Gin Lane, wasn't exaggeration, it was reality. Mothers, so deep in the grip of addiction, neglected their children. Babies were left unfed, or worse, dosed with gin to keep them quiet. There are accounts of women selling their possessions, even their children's clothes, just for another cup of gin. In some cases, infants literally wasted away while their mothers drank themselves into oblivion. And then there is the infamous story of Judith Dufour, a silkwinder from Spitalfields. In 1734, she collected her 2-year-old child from the workhouse where he had been cared for. She strangled him, stripped him of his clothes, and sold the garments so she could buy gin. That child's life reduced to a bottle. Her story shocked Londoners, but tragically, it wasn't unique. A city drowning the numbers paint a grim picture. By the 1740s, London consumed an estimated 10 million gallons of gin per year. That's enough for every man, woman, and child to drink dozens of pints annually. Arrest records tell us that drunkenness wasn't just common, it was epidemic. Hospitals filled with gin-soaked bodies. Coroners recorded deaths from poisoning, falls, violence, and neglect, all tied to the bottle. Entire neighborhoods spiraled downward, crime rates soared, infant mortality skyrocketed, and work productivity collapsed. If you were poor, gin was both your painkiller and your curse. It dulled the hunger when bread was scarce. It numbed the cold when coal was too expensive. But slowly, it hollowed people out until nothing remained. Gin as medicine. One of the cruelest ironies of the gin craze was how it was sold as medicine. Apothecaries and street vendors advertised it as a cure-all, good for the stomach, good for the nerves, even good for teething babies. Imagine the damage. Children being spoon-fed raw gin to calm their cries. The sick being prescribed a drink that only worsened their condition. It was cheap, accessible, and marketed as health when in truth, it was a silent killer. The faces of addiction in the 1700s didn't have the language we use today. Nobody spoke of alcoholism or substance abuse disorders. People just said the city was full of drunkards, wastrels, and degenerates. But what they were witnessing was a public health crisis centuries ahead of its time. First came the shaking hands. Then the wasted bodies, teeth rotted from neglect, eyes sunken from malnutrition. Some were too drunk to work, collapsing in alleys. Others wandered the streets half-mad, hallucinating, begging, or turning to theft and violence to feed the habit. Londoners called them gin-soaked, and you could spot them from blocks away. Violence and crime and gin did not just destroy the self, it destroyed society. Crime rates in London exploded during the gin craze. Theft, burglary, prostitution, and assault all rose as addicts struggled to fund their next drink. Women, especially, were drawn into cycles of exploitation. With gin cheap and readily available, many turned to prostitution as a way to earn money for more drink. Brothels thrived in Gin Alley, where sex, crime, and intoxication blurred into one suffocating atmosphere. Violence became routine. Brawls broke out in taverns, men beat their wives in drunken stupors, and entire districts became unsafe after dark. The very fabric of London life seemed to unravel under the haze of cheap liquor. Death by gin. When you drank gin in 1700s London, you gambled with your life. This wasn't today's refined gin with its delicate botanical flavors. No, this was crude, often unregulated, and sometimes laced with turpentine, sulfuric acid, or even sawdust to stretch out the supply. People went blind. Others dropped dead after a few gulps. The mortality rate was staggering. In some parishes, infant mortality doubled. Adults wasted away before they reached middle age. Some historians estimate that at the height of the craze, 1 in every 5 deaths among London's poor was tied to gin. A generation scarred. What's most haunting is that the gin craze wasn't a short-lived fad. It lasted decades, long enough to scar entire generations. Children born into Gin Alley often never had a chance. If they survived infancy, they grew up surrounded by addiction, crime, and despair. And yet, people kept drinking. Why? Because for many, life in 1700s London offered little else. Work was backbreaking, food scarce, housing miserable, and hope nearly non-existent. Gin was the one reliable comfort, even if it destroyed you in the process. The human cost. In a sentence, in short, Gin Alley consumed the weak, hollowed the poor, and robbed London of its future. It was a slow-motion tragedy played out in the streets, where the promise of escape turned into a nightmare of destruction.